Welcome to another episode of our video series of the mechanics of human cognition. So we're talking about war today, and we tend to think of it as this permanent, inevitable part of the human condition. But I want to propose a different frame. What if it's not a permanent flaw? What if it's more like an old piece of software, a feature in our human operating system that's just desperately in need of an upgrade? That's a powerful way to put it. And to really grasp how deeply embedded that software is, you just have to look at the numbers. We're talking about 90 to 95% of all recorded human history being marked by a major war happening somewhere. It's this constant, brutal backdrop to our entire story, which, of course, begs the fundamental question, why? Why is this the case? Exactly. So let's start there. We're gonna unpack this persistent, reoccurring bug in the system of human civilization. So, why is conflict our go-to, our default setting for solving major problems? I mean, to be blunt about it, it seems that as a species, we just haven't fully matured into using reason and logic alone for these huge disputes. When things get serious, when our core sense of security or resources feel threatened, we revert. Aggression becomes the default path. Right. And this is where we need to distinguish between two types of causes. Think of it like an iceberg. What we see, what gets reported in the news, is the tip, the proximate cause. That single event, like the assassination of an archduke, that sparks the whole thing. But the real danger, the real mass, is what's under the water. That's the ultimate cause, the deep-seated evolutionary and cognitive programming that makes us prone to conflict in the first place. That's the code we're talking about. And to really understand that code, you have to start with the hardware it runs on. Let's talk about our brain's factory settings. This really gets to the core of the problem, doesn't it? Our brains are essentially running on hunter-gatherer software. We're living in this incredibly complex modern world of global networks and advanced technology, but the underlying operating system, our fears, our anxieties, our tribal instincts, it was all coded for survival on the savannah thousands of years ago. It's a huge mismatch. Absolutely, and a key component of that software is something called adaptive aggression. Now, it's crucial to understand this isn't some inherently evil thing. It's a trait that was absolutely vital for our survival. It helped us hunt, defend territory, protect our kin. The problem is that same incredibly useful, deeply ingrained trait can be, weaponized in our modern context in truly catastrophic ways. And you can't talk about the biological hardware without mentioning hormones, specifically testosterone. Now, we have to be careful here. It's not the only driver, and it's not a simple cause of violence, but the research is clear. It acts as a powerful amplifier. It lowers the threshold for aggression and pushes us toward confrontation. It's a factory setting that, again, made perfect sense in our evolutionary past. And to give you a sense of just how deep this impulse runs, there's some really startling psychological research. One study found that 86% of men admitted to having at least one fantasy about killing someone. Now, let's be crystal clear. This is about impulse, not action. It's thought, not deed. But it's a powerful indicator of how widespread and deeply rooted the potential for this kind of aggression is in our basic cognitive makeup. Okay, so we've talked about the hardware, the biological predispositions, but that's only half the picture. Now we have to look at the software, the stories, the ideologies, the narratives that we install on top of that hardware. Yeah, this quote really nails it. For a highly social species like us, killing another human is one of the most psychologically difficult things you can do. It goes against our nature. So to get people to do it on a mass scale, you need an incredibly powerful story. You need a narrative that reframes a horrific act into something not just acceptable, but a moral imperative, a sacred duty. And what's fascinating and also terrifying is that these stories tend to follow a very predictable script, a four-step playbook, really. First, you have to create an other, a clear us versus them. Then, you frame the entire situation as a simple black and white battle of good versus evil. Third, and this is crucial, you dehumanize the opposition. They're not people anymore, they're monsters, insects, a disease. And once you've done that, the final step is easy. Declare violence not just an option, but an absolute necessity. It's a formula that's been used again and again throughout history because, it works. So that raises the question, how is this ancient hardware and this manipulative software being exploited in our modern world? Let's talk about the true aim of many modern conflicts.
This is a really critical point for understanding the 21st century. For a lot of the wars that play out on our screens, the primary objective isn't what we traditionally think it is. It's not always about grabbing territory or securing resources. The main battlefield is for public opinion. The goal is to get you to pick a side. It's about creating supporters and consolidating a narrative.
Which brings up a really tough question we all have to ask ourselves, especially when we feel that very natural, very human pull to declare our allegiance in a conflict we see on the news. The question is, who truly benefits when you choose a side? Because from this perspective, the moment you pick a side, you become a predictable piece on the chessboard. You're now reinforcing this simplistic good versus evil narrative. You become the consumer for targeted information or propaganda. You are now, perhaps unwittingly, serving the war's real goal, which is to create and deepen division. It's a provocative thought, but it suggests that taking a side isn't necessarily an act of justice. It's an act of participation in the very system that perpetuates the suffering. Okay, that sounds incredibly bleak, I get it, but is the system permanent? Is this just how things are? And that leads us to the final, and maybe the most important question of all. Can we actually evolve past this? Is it possible to reboot the system? Well, history might actually offer a glimmer of hope here. If you look at Europe, for centuries, it was arguably the most violent, war-torn continent on the planet. I mean, just centuries of bloodshed. But after the unimaginable trauma of the world wars, something shifted. A collective cognitive change happened. The suffering became so immense, so unbearable, that it forced a completely new way of thinking, which eventually led to things like the European Union, an institution fundamentally designed to make war between its members not just difficult, but unthinkable. And that's the key, right? Europe learned through immense suffering. But the hope now in our globally connected world is that we don't all have to go through that level of trauma to get the lesson. We can learn from the experiences of others. We can recognize the pattern and hopefully make a conscious choice to break it before we have to endure it ourselves. Which I think brings us to the core takeaway here. That primal aggressive drive, that hunter-gatherer software, it isn't just going to disappear. It's baked into our code. So the real choice isn't whether to have it, but where to direct it. We can continue to point it outwards, leading to destructive conflict with others, or we can redirect that exact same energy inwards. We can wage a war for self-mastery, for discipline, for creativity, for overcoming our own internal limitations. It's the same energy, just channeled constructively instead of destructively. So that's where we're left. All of this programming, this tribal aggressive instinct, it got us here. It helped our species survive for millennia. There's no denying its power. But the question facing us now in the 21st century isn't just about survival anymore. It's about whether we can become conscious architects of our own minds. Can we take control of that code and actively rewrite it so that we can finally truly thrive as a species? That really is the choice in front of all of us.